I'm actually gonna have you just switch one more time and read this one. You're not gonna add anything to this one, but you're just gonna have, so now you'll have just a bunch of ideas in front of you, along with all the other ideas that you saw or you worked on the other one, so that our discussion's a little bit more rich. So let's start at the beginning. And you guys can feel free as we're doing this discussion, if you haven't turned in your 5 steps for analysis, this would be a good time to, you can use this as to do your assignment. So let's talk about content first. That's number one. You know, what are the things, the literal content? What are the details that we think are important, the literal content of this text? Megan, what about you?
White man accidentally kills a black boy, finds out to do something.
Okay, good. Okay, very important detail. Very good. Anybody else? Who else has that number one? There must be one, two others. Here, so what else is important as far as content?
He couldn't like win the side of people, I guess. I mean, everybody pretty much wrote down that nobody knew it was his son.
Okay, nobody knows it's his son. Good, and that's an important detail. Okay, that we don't know as readers, and it doesn't seem like anybody else in the characters do either. Okay, good. Who else for content? Yes, Ashlyn.
He was going home to with his dad's son, and then it turned out to be Logan.
Okay, good. A detail that's important, right? That might have some symbolism in there. He's going hunting with his father's gun. You know, a lot of people, I remember in the spring, pointed out too, these details that are important, like the location. He was outside, you know, Lucas is outside of the truck instead of inside, like it's a barrier. He is killed accidentally is another good detail. Are there any other details as far as content plot that you think are important as far as they could have more meaning later, we should be looking at them? Okay, let's move on to composition then. This, like a lot of her short stories, you gotta pay attention, right? She kind of does these shifts a lot, and she uses narration in a way that usually helps her get at her ideas. And sometimes it's not very easy to follow. So let's hear from the composition people. What did you or others write down about how the text is structured? Who's got the composition ones? Okay, Haley, what you got?
It says that the action peaks when he thinks the gun is loaded.
Okay, the action peaks when he thinks it isn't. Like we can sense like this is, something's, when she says that it's never loaded, we know that yes, it is loaded. Of course, and we know that he's already dead already too. Good. Jocelyn, you have this too?
Yeah.
Very good. I say that's probably one of the most important details as far as how this story is put together. The use of the narrator, and there is even the kind of shift between the very biased narrator, and then we have a little bit more objectivity, and then back to that biased narrator. And so when you're thinking about what supports this idea that she's getting at, that choice and that how it's put together is really key, the narrator. Anything else about the composition? You don't have to have necessarily that piece in front of you. You know, is there anything about how the characters are included? Is there anything about the beginning or the end of this story that are important? Like, do you have any clue when you start this? Like, when it starts, whose perspective are we from? Like Jocelyn said, like we're from that biased narrator, right? Do we have any clue about that? We just have to catch on, right? We have to catch on to that ourselves. So, you know, how she begins it is important. She kind of smacks us in the face with kind of a perspective that we may or may not have. What about the end of the story? Is that important? Yeah, because it's kind of like this shock that maybe changes how we've seen everything else in this story too. Okay, and I liked what you said then too, Haley, about when the action seems to peak. And we do have some separation. We have kind of the shifts in the narration. That's good. All right, context. where does the story take place? Now, we can talk about this like on a big scale, you know, set in South Africa during apartheid, or we can talk about it in smaller ways too. So who's got context? Sophie, what do you got?
Well, it takes place in South Africa during a time of protest, which is both what we're saying.
Okay, it takes it during protests, and that's
Yeah.
important, because there's protests, there seems to be kind of two sides that are going on, right? Good. Cam, what else you got?
Takes place on the Van der Weijers farm.
Okay, Van der Weijers farm, and, there's also, that could be important too, when you think about kind of the vast land, but we also think about, there maybe is something that she's doing with the kudu that they're hunting, you know, like the farm, the hunting situation, that might be symbolic, or that might be important later on too. Okay. What else is important about this? So we have, okay, so we kind of track the places of action, and we kind of have this beginning where it's not really, they're not anywhere, but then we have the farm, where else, how else is setting used? Where does Van der Weijers go to report things? Police station, okay, so that's included. Then we're taken to a scene where? On the farm, but it's a specific scene, it's what? The funeral. And then we have, well, maybe right before that, actually, we have the account of the farm, and then we have the truck, the inside, the outside, which might be also symbolic or significant, right? That he's not allowed inside the truck, the driver's in the truck. And then we have the funeral, and then we come back at the end, and we kind of have this objective narrator telling us kind of the truth. Okay. Anything else about context? Now we're getting it somewhere. Now we're cooking with gas, as they say. Okay. Style. Okay, what stood out? Because maybe this is our first time really looking at Gortimer's style. You know, we read some in the spring, but maybe now we're like, okay, what is this lady all about, and what is this story kind of doing? So, who are my style people? Okay, Jenny, let's start over there. What did you or others notice about style?
Well, for the tone, it was kind of biased throughout the story, switching between sides and points of view of the situation.
Very good. So the tone, like when we talk about tone, because the narrator's biased, like when the narrator is looking at the funeral and talking about Lucas's family, like the tone is very condescending maybe, or it's very, what's another word that might describe how the narrator is feeling about Lucas's family? They always are pregnant early. They don't have any money, like, so judgmental, right? Judgmental, condescending. Good. So tone is really important. Okay. Anything else, Jenny, that you or others noted about style?
There was very strong imagery.
Okay. Strong imagery. Were there any examples or just like side notes that you could think of?
I guess kind of like the car part when they were in the car and the gun went off.
Good. And the description of the kudu, even in the bush, and how it's running and how its stripes appear. Good. Lots of imagery there. Good. Ellie, what about you? What did you or others note about style?
Imagery,
Lots of imagery.
like in the police station.
Good, and like how he's crying. And that imagery is always used to kind of help us understand something, right? Either to, like maybe in the kudu, that part is to kind of point out some similarities between Lucas and the kudu. And in the police office, you know, what do you think is the imagery is doing there?
Like showing, I think it shows like how the farmer is actually kind of separated from like the white perspective of government, because the police officer like was like, why are you such a mess right now? And
Okay,
he like
good.
could see how bad he felt.
Okay, so it kind of illustrates Van der Weijers' feelings about the situation, which might be different, it seems to be different from the police officer, or from the chief or whatever. Good. Alright, anything else about like sentence structure is a big deal. Do you notice how she uses, how she notes dialogue? Gortimer? Does she use, like normally if we have somebody that's speaking, and it may not be so much in the story, but quotation marks, she doesn't do that, she just kinda does, I mean, she has a very challenging style. Sentence structure can like sometimes be long and complex, and then she can shift to short, and she does that for effect a lot. A lot of times there's multiple layers in what she's saying, you know, so we have multiple meanings, which is cool, but it can be challenging. Very good. Anything else about this? About the style? Okay, all right, now, this is what we came for. Theme. Okay, what are some ideas? Now, I'm gonna go to the people that have this in front of them first, but I'm gonna ask other people too. You know, this is a time, you don't have to write a perfect plan here. This is the time to really think, what is she suggesting to us? And it could be about a lot of different topics. So you can just start out, you know, you could even just say something, I'm not sure exactly, but I know she's asking us to think about this. Okay, what is she trying to accomplish? What does she want us to consider a question? It can be connected to a global issue, but it should be more than just a identity. You know, it should be more than something more specific than just like that kind of topic. Okay, who are my theme people that have that? Okay, I'm gonna start with you. Ryan, what do you got, or what do others have?
One moment can change everything.
Okay, so one moment, I'm gonna write these down actually, because this is what we're gonna be working with, obviously, with our plane. This is kind of how we start, or it's the most important part. Okay, so ideas for theme. So we got, okay, one moment can change things, okay, and we know that, you know, she even has that in her title. Okay, what are some other ideas? Who had, Jenny, you had it, Brooke, you had it.
The media can affect the story based off its view.
Okay, media can affect viewer or whoever. Okay, good. So maybe it's something about like a moment to change things, media. What are some other ideas? Jeff?
I think it's hard to like things that happen in that person, about something that repeats itself, so.
Okay. Okay, we can become like desensitized to things, to like tragedy. That's really good. Okay. So, tragedy repeats when we don't pay attention to history. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other ideas? You can just talk about, like, I think she's talking about this topic. I don't know what she's saying, but. Do you think there's anything in here about the victims of, particularly in this case, apartheid as a system, but as racial injustice? I mean, it's a story about somebody who gets killed and then somebody else who is devastated, right? So is there something maybe about, in particular, she's, you know, dealing with apartheid, but, the victims or suffering of racial oppression? Any other ideas? Okay, so now you have to use your heads and really think and put a lot of things together, including